Sonic the Hedgehog is one of the most iconic gaming franchises of all time. It's a series that means a lot to many people, including myself. In fact, it's probably my favorite game franchise of all time, well, tied with Mario at least. This series has crafted so many fond memories and experiences that really can't be found anywhere else. From the unique and fast-paced platforming, the stylish presentation, the vast array of characters, and some of the best music in all of gaming, you name it. Don't even get me started on all the different merchandise, comics, TV shows, and even movies now. Like, holy crap man, Sonic's been through so much over these years. Not every year has been perfect or even good, mind you, but still, there's been fun times and experiences I wouldn't trade the world for. But really though, we wouldn't be where we are now if it wasn't for the game that pretty much kicked off the entire series. You all know it, it's the OG Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, I could talk about how influential of a game Sonic 1 was and how it helped boost sales for the Genesis and give Nintendo a run for their money. You know, things that most people have already talked about many times over the years. However, I am more interested in discussing the game itself and how well it holds up today. Mainly because from what I've seen, some people say they still love the game, while others feel more mixed about it. I usually see these people say that only 2 of its zones are good, those typically being Green Hill and Starlight Zone, and the rest being pretty mediocre or straight up bad. And to be honest, I had a somewhat similar opinion at one point, only finding Sonic 1 to be a pretty okay game at best. However, upon replaying it a lot more recently, especially for this video, I found myself really enjoying it and appreciating the finer details that went into making it. Even if the game doesn't feel as fully realized as future sequels, I still find it very fun and much more solidly designed than some may give it credit for. So I'm hoping today I can try my best to explain my feelings towards it and why I still believe it to be a good game. Since we're talking about the first Sonic game, I feel it would be best to go over the general mechanics of the series and how these games have worked over the years, at least before diving deep into the game itself. Hopefully this won't be too redundant for anyone that's already played a lot of Sonic games like I have. But as I've said, I feel it's important to talk about with specifically the first game in mind, so please just hear me out for a minute. Okay, so if there's one thing we all probably know about Sonic, it's that he likes to go really fast. I know, who would have guessed that, right? Speed has been such an integral part of the series since pretty much its inception, even having the first game's overall mechanics focus around speed. Even series creator Yuji Naka has stated that a huge inspiration on the game's development came from playing the early stages in the original Super Mario Bros. Quickly. He would do this so he can get back to where he left off as fast as possible, due to there being no save feature in the game. So this idea of a really fast-paced platformer was always a primary focus in development. Also, that same Yuji Naka guy just mentioned, you know, the Sonic series creator. He recently got himself sentenced 2.5 years in prison. Yeah, I know, what the heck. It apparently has to do with some insider trading stuff or whatever, so yeah. My man Yuji hasn't been doing the best, to put it lightly. Anyways, getting back on topic. If you've never played a Sonic game before, which I'll assume you have considering you're watching this video in the first place, but if you have not, you may be asking yourself, how do you go fast in these Sonic games? Well, when it comes to Sonic, it depends on what game you're talking about. For most of the modern titles that have come out in the past decade and a half, I think, geez, time sure does go by fast, doesn't it? You do so by filling up a boost gauge and then holding a button down, which causes Sonic to gain a burst of speed and go insanely fast. However, it works quite differently in the classic games. Instead of the boost, the classics used momentum-based physics to gain speed. The primary way you'd gain or lose momentum was with the level terrain, mainly with slopes. Before Sonic, slopes and platformers were more so a way to add visual and gameplay variety. For example, in Mario 3 Your World, slopes were used as a way to either slow Mario down a bit when going up one, or gaining speed when going down one. They even added a mechanic that allows Mario to slide down these slopes to go faster and defeat upcoming enemies. As cool of a mechanic as this is, the game as a whole still doesn't fully rely on slopes for the core gameplay. It's just one part of many other aspects that makes those games what they are. Sonic, on the other hand, approaches it a bit differently. Slopes are used as the primary way of gaining momentum, using said momentum to go fast. Just like Mario, pressing or holding down will make you go faster when going downhill, but now you go insanely fast as Sonic even curls up into a ball, using his spikes while rolling around as a form of attack. I especially love this detail due to the fact that Sonic is, well, a hedgehog, and you know, hedgehogs have sharp quills and can roll up into a ball. You get what I mean. Not only can you use slopes to go faster, but they can also be used for platforming. If you gain enough speed and then use said speed off an upward slope, you can go really high up to reach certain sections. It is such a satisfying thing to do in any of these games. These mechanics are primarily what makes the classic Sonic games so unique for their time and even now to this day. There's also collectibles called rings, which I'll briefly go over since I assume you probably already know what they are. They basically work as another hit point for Sonic. You must at least have one ring, or else you'll die to any enemies or hazards, basically making rings extremely important to collect. And when you do get hit with rings, you lose all of them and they scatter all over the place, which forces you to collect as many as possible. Which thankfully isn't too difficult to at least get one of those rings back, which is all you really need to survive. Getting 100 rings, similar to getting 100 coins in Mario, also gives you an extra life, which if you want to do, you'll have to play well and not get hit. What I always found cool and interesting about this is that you can approach the game differently with this in mind. If you're more scared of losing lives, it's best to play it safe and get as many rings as possible. However, you could also play more risky and fast, which will more likely lead you to getting hit, but as long as you have one ring or don't specifically get crushed, you'll stay alive. But you'll still risk dying more easily as well as having less lives to work with too. So all in all, it's a risk-reward system that I think is pretty well done. It's been a staple in every mainline Sonic game since the beginning. Also, with how fast Sonic games can be, having a health system that isn't too overly punishing is nice. Though I will say, some Sonic games have used rings as an excuse for bad level design at times, mainly for upcoming obstacles and enemies that are unreactable. Thankfully, Sonic 1 doesn't have too many moments like that, though it can happen occasionally. 2D Sonic games tend to always have this sort of issue present to some extent anyways, so it's not like it'd be a problem exclusive to this game. Okay, so this is a video about the first Sonic game after all, not the entire classic series. So how does the game's controls and level design hold up with this design philosophy in mind? Well, let's talk about just that. Let's start with the controls, since we just discussed the general mechanics of these games. I'd say it overall feels pretty good, but definitely has a few issues. For one, remember when I said Sonic goes faster downhill by spinning? Well, in Sonic 1, you can only go faster by rolling into a wall. For whatever reason, Sonic has a set speed limit for when he's running but not when he's spinning. It's not a big deal per se, but it does feel a tad off. Just as an example, there's a cool tech in future games where you can run halfway around a loop and then jump down at the perfect time to get even more speed. However, because it automatically makes you run instead of spin, Sonic will lose all of his momentum by doing this in the first game, so it feels a little slower. It sorta reminds me of an issue I had with another game with the exact same name. Okay, at the very least you have some form of momentum or just actual weight to Sonic at the first game, unlike in 06, but still, it has that same issue where there's a cap to Sonic's running speed. Anyways, another issue I have is when rolling off slopes to make a big jump with a ton of momentum, you can't control yourself in midair, making it harder to precisely land where you need to be. This really isn't a big issue either, besides for a couple exceptions in the game, but still something to mention. The biggest problem I have with the controls is there being no spin dash. It's obviously not their fault for not inventing the spin dash yet, but it just doesn't feel quite right without it. There are many times where I'll be slowed down by something and be up a steep slope, and instead of being able to spin dash up the slope with ease, I have to walk back a bit and then start running to get enough speed to get over it, which can feel a tad clunky. I swear, I've seen so many opportunities where I find terrain I could spin dash on to make crazy jumps, but I don't have the ability to do so. But even despite those issues, I still think the game feels pretty good to play, just a little dated is all. Now, I know I went over the core gameplay pretty in depth, both for Sonic 1 and the entire series. I apologize if it may have sounded a bit redundant for people that are already aware of Sonic and how the games are played, but I feel it's important to bring up now that we're going to dive deeper into the game's zones and how each one is designed with the core mechanics in mind. Of course, I'll be going in order when discussing each zone, so we'll be starting with Green Hill Zone, the introduction stage of Sonic 1. Pretty much everyone knows Green Hill by now. It's been reused so many times in Sonic games, and is pretty much rehashed as often as 8-bit Mario is for the Mario series. Most people are tired of seeing it, but I don't think that should completely take away from how great it can be. It's generally an amazing stage, and I still feel it is a great representation of what Sonic is all about. I mean, for one, Green Hill really takes advantage of the momentum-based gameplay I've already discussed and builds level design around it. There's so many things that allow you to easily gain speed, like slopes, loop-de-loops, and occasionally springs that help keep the momentum going. Act 1 especially does a great job easing the player into the feel of the game and its speed while not requiring too much from them either. The best example of this is the big jump near the end of the stage. Before the jump, you put yourself in this hole that pretty much forces the player to spin and go down it, without much waste of slowing yourself down on accident, just so that it guarantees that you will most likely make that big jump. And yes, I know it's not always best to handhold the player and give them immediate gratification, but in this case, since it's the first stage of a new style of gameplay never seen before at the time, I think it's perfectly fine to have something like this to show the player Sonic's true potential and his speed. Not just in going fast, but utilizing his speed to your advantage to make big jumps. Plus, another big part of Sonic's identity is having memorable and cool moments you'll most likely never forget. It's pretty much a thing in every Sonic game, like running away from the big truck or Orca Whale in the adventure games. But to my knowledge, Act 1's big jump is the first instance of this in action. Once again, it's not just about the spectacle aspect either, there's gotta be substance to it as well, which thankfully Green Hill does have plenty of. I mean, heck, after the big jump, the game has a bunch of rings in the sky for you to collect as an incentive to, actually move and do something after the jump and not just watch the gameplay itself. You can even jump on one of the flying enemies to keep yourself in the air just a little longer. As I've mentioned before, you don't just go fast completely for free. You still got to time your jumps just right in order to keep your momentum going. Stuff like enemies to avoid, rocks to jump over, loop-de-loops that require enough speed to completely run around on, and plenty of slopes to use to your advantage. Green Hill is such a fun zone to speedrun through in general because of how tightly designed it is for speed. Though Green Hill's faster paced level design comes with some setbacks. Because of how fast you can go through the stage, Green Hill's acts tend to be very short. You can beat each act in at least a minute or less, possibly 30 seconds if you're good enough. It's not the end of the world per se, but when you compare its length to the rest of the zones in the game, you'll realize how much shorter Green Hill is in comparison. Green Hill also sorta attempts another design philosophy future Sonic games would have, where there's multiple pathways you can go through. Usually the upper routes are faster and less dangerous than the lower routes, so you feel incentivized to time your jumps well so you can stay on the upper path. It's not always this way 100% of the time though. Some of the very top paths in Green Hill actually end up being slower than the middle routes, but they tend to have good rewards, so it may be good to go up there and explore. Speaking of which, I have been talking about how Green Hill rewards speed and level mastery, but it's not like you have to go fast. It also rewards players to take their time and explore too. There is tons of secrets to find with usually rings, extra lives, or power-ups, like the monitors hiding above some palm trees, or the floating platforms above that take you to the very top areas I mentioned before. It's still fun and interesting for those that want to take a more safe approach and observe the environment around them too. Personally, I don't play like this too often anymore just because I don't tend to need lots of lives and I enjoy speedrunning these stages more, but it's still nice to give that as an option for those kind of players, especially for the later zones to come. There's one beginning part in Act 2 I would like to go into detail about, because I feel it shows off this balance between speed, platforming, and exploration all at the same time. To begin the stage, there's the specific set of spikes that are below the hill that you're running on, which are pretty much impossible to get hit by unless you purposely go back and try to get hit by it yourself, which can seem a bit fishy to the player and you may question why it's even there at all. And if you're really observant, you may notice that there is no visible ground past the spikes, which may make you curious if there's some sort of secret below. It is possible to jump in between the spikes and the hill above, but it is pretty precise and you need enough speed as well to make the jump all the way over. Once you finally get past it, you'll see multiple item monitors, which these give you some rings and invincibility power-up. After collecting those, you'll see a wall you can destroy by spinning into it. Once you do that, you'll see a speed up power-up, which pretty much speaks for itself. It literally just makes you go faster. Using both power-ups, you can easily plow through enemies and make it past certain obstacles, like the long uphill incline. You can even reach an extra life on top of the loop-de-loop with a well-typed jump, which you may have tried before to get but couldn't without the speed power-up. After that, you can jump off the top of the loop and land on one of the rising pillars, and time your jump right to the next one you could reach. You can't just mindlessly run and jump in this section either, or else you risk missing one of the pillars and losing speed or potentially dying when you run out of the invincibility. So once again, actual thoughtful platforming, but it still allows you to do it fast if you're good enough. I absolutely love this entire sequence, and it's pretty much the main reason why I specifically love Act 2 the most out of the 3 acts Green Hill has to offer. It requires outside thinking and exploration that feels rewarding to discover, while also having fun and fast-paced platforming sections that require timing and precision. It's just too perfect in my opinion. And heck man, I haven't even brought up the visuals and music that accompany this already great zone. The visuals that Green Hill provides is just gorgeous, there's so much color and life to it. With the green palm trees and grassy plains, the blue lush waterfalls, and the iconic brown checkerboard pattern, it all comes together to give Green Hill its identity. Even the backgrounds has a similar look to it with the mountains and waterfalls. You combine this with the upbeat and fun music, it ends up giving Green Hill such a feel-good and happy vibe to it, which I feel also really fits the gameplay and level design too. The speed you get and how satisfying it is to nail all the platforming and such, it makes you feel pretty much unstoppable. And I know, that may have sounded pretty corny or cringe, but I do really feel that way whenever I play through it. That fun and uplifting feeling I get from Green Hill is such a big part in why I love Sonic so much too. It's what the series is all about, and I mean, if that doesn't go to show how perfect of an introductory stage Green Hill is not only for the game, but the entire Sonic series, then I don't know what would be. Oh yeah, there's also a boss fight at the end of Act 3 for each zone, including this one. The boss itself is nothing to write home about though, it's pretty easy, just a matter of timing your jumps right without getting hit by the ball or at least going to the far corners of the screen. I do say it's easy, but funnily enough, I used to struggle a lot with this boss as a kid, for some bizarre and stupid reason. I remember being so proud of myself when I beat it for the first time too. I know, I was really bad at games as a kid, especially when it came to 2D platformers. Look, I get it. Green Hill has been rehashed and milked to oblivion. Its novelty has worn off for people, and I totally get that. For me though, no matter how many times it gets brought back into future Sonic games, I'll at the very least always appreciate this first iteration, how well it was made back then and even now. And you can't lie to me and say Green Hill wasn't the blueprint for future Sonic games level design, as well as being a staple for Sonic games to have such amazing first impressions. Overall, Green Hill is absolutely a banger of a stage, and I'll always love it for what it is. Next up, we have Marble Zone, considered by many to be one of the worst zones in the entire game. It's slow, boring, tedious, and it's much more difficult than what came previously. Things like the slow-moving blocks, the abundance of spikes and lava, the lack of slopes to use to gain speed, and its more enclosed and claustrophobic level structure can really throw off the player. Even the music is a little less uplifting to match its more darker tone, or at least more so than Green Hill. Now that you're exploring underground caves and ruins, it's so much more intimidating. Though, I will say, I do really like that the upper areas still have some green grass and hills in the background, similar to Green Hill. Because of everything I've stated so far, you'd assume I dislike Marble Zone as much as everyone else, right? Well, what if I told you I don't find Marble Zone to be that bad? In fact, I think it's a pretty decent stage and I find it to be quite underrated. And yes, I know, you're probably thinking to yourself, really, you're going to defend Marble Zone of all stages? Marble Zone? Yes, I am. And no, I'm not just saying this to be a contrarian. I really don't care if what I'm saying is a popular opinion or not. This is just how I truly feel. I do genuinely have my reasons for why I enjoy it, and I'd like to explain why. Also, I still have plenty of issues with the stage too. It's not like I absolutely love everything about it. I'd even say it's not that great, but it's not bad either. I'd like to start off with the areas outside of the caves, because I feel they have the most Sonic-esque level design in terms of actual slopes and more room to breathe in. Though, unlike Green Hill, it lacks any real easy ways to gain speed, like having no loops, springs, or hardly any steep downward inclines. The slopes are much less pronounced and not nearly as steep as Green Hill's. They're more like small little bumps. Despite this though, there are still ways to use the level terrain to make slightly higher jumps or just go a little faster. These bumps can still change your momentum, and depending on how you time your jumps, you can go either higher vertically or faster horizontally. I find this especially useful for the more vertical platforming sections, though you still have to be careful due to enemies, as well as the fireballs that rise up from the lava. It's a lot more subtle in how you gain speed and utilize the terrain around you than in Green Hill. That's almost what I kind of love about it. As for the cave and ruin areas, these are much more closed in and way harder to go fast in, pretty much due to there being no slopes in sight, and tons of obstacles that are constantly slowing the player down. I mean, the very first obstacle you run into down here is these vertical moving pillars that you have to sit and wait and go up and down before you can move forward. It's not hard to time, nor is it interesting or a fun section. It's just kind of slow and wastes your time. There's other obstacles like this too, like needing to move blocks slowly to hit switches, waiting for spiked platforms hanging from the ceiling to come down, or riding slowly on these moving blocks in the lava. To some, it may seem impossible to speed these sections up, but that's not entirely true in some of these cases, like riding the blocks in the lava. There are a couple of sections where you don't need to ride them at all. There's these floating platforms you can jump on top of. These are usually used to stand on so you can wait for the block below to keep moving forward. But if you time your jumps right, you can actually get past these areas entirely without touching the lava or riding the block at all. Once again, it's subtle and not super obvious, but in a way that I find to be fun and enjoyable. There's other, more slower paced platforming sections, but I find these to be pretty fun since it takes careful timing, such as the areas with the spikes, small platforms, and the robot bats that I don't know the names of. Or this area here that I absolutely love. You pretty much need to time your jumps in this really cramped hallway while being chased by lava. If you're good enough, you can keep your momentum going by timing your jumps just right to both jump over the platforms and also manage to not hit the walls hanging above the ceiling. It is once again more subtle and also requires more strict timing, but in a way that I find to be fun. Unfortunately, there are moments where you still have to wait and do nothing, like with the falling spikes, or this one instance where you do have to wait on a moving block. But otherwise, there are ways around some of these obstacles and I really enjoy finding the solutions to them, since it's not in plain sight. Also, I will admit, sometimes I use my invincibility frames after getting hit to run through the lava and get past certain sections, pretty much so I don't have to wait. It doesn't always work, nor is it a fun or well-designed way to skip slower sections, but it is a way to go faster if you get a bit impatient like I do. It does feel a bit too early to throw these kind of obstacles at the player though, especially if they haven't been too equipped and experienced in Sonic games. Plus, I also do think Marble Zone should have had more easier ways to gain speed while also having these more subtle moments too. These platforming areas feel more like level design you'd see in a traditional platformer, not one like Sonic. Not reaching crazy speeds, but still ways to go faster through it. It feels more like Mario or something in that regard. I will also say that I tend to not enjoy when Sonic games have more cramped level design like this either, but at the very least, there is a bit of nuance to Marble Zone and it isn't a complete slog to get through once you get better at it. Another thing I'd like to mention is the exploration. It's not as open as Green Hill unfortunately, but there is some secrets to find, mainly these hidden lives hiding behind some walls. It may seem a bit cryptic, but I do think where their place is possible to spot. Outside of that, there isn't any crazy secrets to find and the level design in general is pretty linear. Even though I had some positive things to say about Marble Zone, it still has many problems and is far from being one of the best zones in any Sonic game. Despite that, I don't think it's as terrible as people say, but I also totally get the distaste for it. Its level design doesn't quite fit Sonic's core gameplay well, and it still feels like a huge difficulty spike that comes way too early on in the game. I mean, as a kid, I was pretty much completely stuck on this stage. I was never able to get past it, which as I've explained before, I clearly sucked at games, or at the very least, gave up too quickly when it came to challenging levels. I did get older and better at games over the years, at least I would hope, but despite that, I was still struggling with it years later, getting constant game overs or having little to no lives after finishing it and moving on to the next zone. I was still stuck and would give up a lot. However, I did end up getting much better at it. I found myself actually really enjoying Marble Zone quite a bit now. It may not be that amazing of a zone, but it ain't that bad either. I can still appreciate some of the things they got right with it and even find some charm in some of its shortcomings, as stupid as that may sound. Oh, and yeah, I almost forgot about the boss fight. It's pretty okay. You just jump from these two platforms with lava in between them while Eggman is shooting fire down, which will cover a whole platform each time he does it. The timing's a bit more strict than Green Hill's boss for sure, but it isn't too hard once you get the hang of it. Besides that, I don't got much else to say, so I suppose we can move on to the next upcoming zone. Spring Art Zone has always been an odd one to me. In terms of level design, it does a much better job in having terrain more akin to Green Hill with more slopes and room to breathe in again. Like with these long half-view pipes that make you go really high up, or these steep hills where you got the time to jump to land on the floating platform above, or at least before hitting the spring. Some of these can help occasionally find secrets or let you make long jumps, but I wouldn't say it's as common here as it was in Green Hill. On the other hand, it also has some of the worst aspects of Marble Zone, like with these floating square-shaped platforms. You pretty much just go up one and wait for the other one to come to your level, then go to that one and then rinse and repeat. It's very boring. There's also these spiked balls that kind of get in your way and slow you down at times, which I find a tad annoying. I'll also say that the new enemies Spring Art shows off are pretty interesting. You got the spiked shell crabs, which you have to defeat by rolling into them or jumping on the very edge of their sprite where their eyes are to avoid getting hit by the spikes. The other enemy is these blue ball-shaped robots, which jump around really fast across the screen and they likely will hit you. Mainly because they usually outrun you, which is pretty crazy to think, considering you're literally Sonic the freaking Hedgehog. It doesn't really make any sense at all, but okay game, sure. You also can't hurt them when they're rolled up into a ball and are only vulnerable once they stop. Combine this with how both unpredictable and unreactable they can be, it gets very annoying to deal with them. Thankfully there isn't that many to begin with, and I think they're only in this zone too, so yeah, that's good. Unlike Green Hill and Marble Zone, I don't really have as much to say this time around when it comes to Spring Art Zone, at least in terms of its level design. It feels stuck between having fast-paced moments, but also slow and monotonous ones too. Spring Art does at least do a better job having the lower path speed slower and the upper path speed faster, something Marble Zone hugely lacked due to it being linear. It still doesn't feel as fully utilized here though, since the stage is rather linear at times, forcing you to go down one path anyways. Also, can we talk about how weird Spring Art Zone actually is? Maybe I'm just overthinking things, but I've always found the whole name and zone of it to be a bit strange. I mean, Spring Yard Zone? Like, I could sorta understand the spring part. There are more springs here than in the previous two zones, but it's not like there's an overabundance of them. We ain't talking about collision chaos here, where there is literally a yard full of springs plastered everywhere. And I wouldn't say it looks quite like a yard either, it's more like an entire city. Even the color palette is weird to me. It has a greenish white color with a primary reddish orange colored buildings, as well as a purple sky background. Okay, I'm definitely overthinking it at this point, because to be frank, I don't really care that much anyways, just kind of odd to me is all. Oh yeah, I once again almost forgot to talk about this zone's boss fight. It is a pretty basic and easy boss to understand, as per usual. Eggman goes down to hit you with a spike that he uses to remove one of the blocks you are able to stand on as well. You just gotta hit him while he's going down to hit you. Besides that, I don't have anything else to add, so let's stop rambling and move on to the next zone. L- l- Labyrinth Zone. Oh gosh, oh no. Man, you want to talk about one of the most hated levels in Sonic history? Look no further. If you're not familiar with this stage and why it's considered so bad, it is mainly due to it being a water level. But it's not just any old water level, it's one where you lack the ability to swim. The only real changes that happen underwater is that you're way slower in every way, and you need to constantly regain oxygen from these big air bubbles that come out of the ground, which sometimes will force you to sit and wait for a few seconds, wasting even more of your time. Despite this though, I personally don't find Labyrinth Zone to be that bad. In fact, I find it to be pretty fun and who am I kidding? As much as I would like to defend Labyrinth Zone, I just can't do it. It really is just slow and boring, and unlike Marble Zone, there isn't much ways to speed up the process. The fact that you can't even swim makes getting to certain sections feel like a complete chore. I know the reason had something to do with Yuji Naka not knowing or believing if hedgehogs can swim, which I can understand back then since he didn't have the internet or an easy way to get that kind of info. But this decision has had such a large impact past this game, being pretty much a thing in every Sonic game with water levels from here on out. And at the very least, they could have done something more interesting than just slowing down Sonic. Not only is it not a very fun or unique gameplay mechanic at all, but it also goes against Sonic's entire concept of going fast. Like, I get that not every single Sonic level needs to be hyper fast, but don't slow it down to this degree, like, my gosh. In terms of the actual platforming and obstacles, it's really not that interesting. You're just slowly making your way through more squished hallways and caves, or jumping on switches to open paths to progress, or slowly riding on these platforms that also include a couple of these really awful spike placements that you can't see coming to the camera, unless you look up quickly, but who in the world's gonna think to do that? Even when you're out of the water, it's still very slow paced. I do find the overall level theme and presentation of Labyrinth Zone to be quite nice though. I love the vibe of it being an ancient ruined place with old architecture, adding to the fact that there's vines and moss, and also booby traps in here that match up well with the old look, like the stone heads that shoot fireballs or spears that stick out further to try and hurt you. I also love the crystals you see as background props too, since it fits in being in a cave themed level. As for the music, it's pretty okay, but it gets very dull listening to it for so long throughout playing the entire zone. This may come as a shock, but something I do really enjoy about this stage is the boss fight. It's pretty much this really squished vertical platforming section with obstacles trying to hurt you. It's definitely pretty difficult, but that's what I like about it. I always try to set a challenge for myself to try and jump all the way to the top before the rising water touches me, which can be hard since you want to do your best to not get hit, but at the same time want to do it in a speedy manner. I know it feels more like a platforming section than it does a boss fight, but I don't really care. I enjoyed it a ton and it's easily my favorite boss thus far. It has a cool and sort of suspenseful lead up to it too, jumping and climbing all the way up to the boss, giving you an idea of what's to come. As much as I do enjoy the boss fight, it doesn't entirely save the stage for me. But despite that, I still have played far worse levels in the Sonic series. That may sound crazy to some, but if you ever played any of the water stages in the 8-bit Sonic games, you would understand how much worse those are in comparison. Trust me, you don't know what true pain is till you've trudged through the abomination that is Blue Marine Zone. Trust me. Even the 8-bit Sonic 1's Labyrinth Zone is far worse. I'd even argue that Labyrinth Zone isn't even the worst stage in the 16-bit titles. It's definitely very close to being the worst, but I'd personally give that honor to Wacky Workbench. I'm not necessarily trying to fully defend Labyrinth Zone, I clearly don't like it, but I'm able to tolerate it much better than some of the other garbage stages the series has to offer. After finally reaching the light at the end of the tunnel, you get to play one of the most well-liked stages in the game, Starlight Zone. To begin, can we talk about how goated the music is? This might very well be my favorite music track in the game. It's a very fun and happy song that never fails to get me excited to play, even after previously going through the worst of the worst the game has to offer. Along with the music, the visuals are quite pleasing too. I mainly love the nighttime aesthetic with the starry skies and lit up buildings in the background of the stage. Probably because it's mainly blue and that is my favorite color, so I'm a bit biased. A big contributor as to why people love Starlight Zone so much is that it's a lot more fast paced, more similar to Green Hill, which I would say is true for the most part. There's more slopes and inclines that help you go fast much easier than even zones like Spring Yard. But there is a healthy dose of platforming too, which some of it is pretty fun. Though there are moments that force you to wait again, like with these blocks that force you to wait for it to completely change shape so you can move forward, or these teeter-totter looking platforms that you can use to go higher up with. It's not really a big deal though, because you're not constantly running into these sections too much, and at least they're sort of interesting. At least the teeter-totter one is. There are these bomb and spike enemies that you cannot hurt at all though, which can sometimes make you wait, which is a little annoying, but once again, not a massive problem. Because of how much more fast-paced Starlight is, you'll find yourself finishing all the acts much quicker than in the previous few zones, which feels quite jarring, I'll admit. It is once again similar to Green Hill in this regard. This kinda goes to show that the developers were likely struggling to make these faster-paced zones lengthy, which I assume is part of the reason why a good majority of the zones have been slower paced. The game would have probably been too short if they went with these type of levels all the way through, and Sonic 1 is already short as it is, being under an hour long once you've played the game a few times like I have. This has always been a problem with Sonic games in general, but that's a discussion for another day. As for the boss, it does utilize the teeter-totter platforms again, which is cool. You can either hit him with the spiked balls or even yourself, I think. Outside of that, I don't have much else to say because at this point, it's stuff I've already talked about and I don't want to sound too much like a broken record, so not that I already don't. Overall, Starlight is for sure one of the better stages in the game and I do enjoy it a ton. We're now at the home stretch, talking about the final main zone the game has to offer, Scrap Brain Zone. I'm not entirely sure what the opinion on the zone is, but I have seen a few people say that they don't like it in the past, which I can see why. Scrap Brain very much reminds me of Marble Zone, and once again lacks much terrain that utilizes Sonic speed at all, but now it's an especially difficult stage too, with platforming and obstacles that really test the player. It doesn't sound all that fun, and it kind of isn't on your first few playthroughs, but similar to Marble Zone, it becomes a lot more enjoyable once you get good at it. I wouldn't say the skill comes from the subtle hints of speed, but more so the difficult platforming sections. There are tons of traps that are flat out unreactable if you try rushing in. They even put one at the beginning of the zone, being an insta-kill trap, which feels pretty unfair. There are these specific obstacles that have fire and spinning platforms so you can easily fall off of in these super cramped hallways. I always struggled with these, but once you find the timing to run in and avoid falling or getting hit, it feels very satisfying. Actually, if there's any zone that takes advantage of the higher routes being easier and faster, it's absolutely this one. The top route is both way easier and way faster than the lower route, at least in Act 1. You want to make sure to jump on these platforms because they take you to the higher route. You can still fall and go lower, so it's a lot more punishing on messing up, but I don't think that's a bad thing. It feels really good getting through all of Act 1, especially without messing up any of the major platforming sections on the way. I bring up Act 1 specifically a lot because all three of Scrap Brain's acts are very different from each other. Act 2 has you go inside and has new obstacles exclusive to it, like the saw blades or these spinning gears that you can gain momentum with and get really high jumps off of. This sounds perfect for a Sonic game, but unfortunately it feels a bit clunky here because once you launch yourself, you can't control where you're going, so it becomes harder to precisely land on certain platforms. This was an issue I mentioned a long while back in the video, but this one was one of the few times it's a real problem. I really like the visuals of both Act 1 and 2 as well, especially Act 1 with the background looking like a power plant, and I also like the fire that pops up frequently too. I also quite like the music. It sounds a bit more foreboding, but still somewhat catchy. Considering I've only brought up Acts 1 and 2 so far, what is Act 3 like? Well, once you finish Act 2, you're greeted with this sort of interactable cutscene, I guess, where Eggman is behind a force field stopping Sonic from continuing forward. He uses this to trap Sonic and make him fall to his doom. This starts up Act 3 and... why? Why is this just Labyrinth Zone? Again! That's right, my friends. The last act in the entire game is frickin' Labyrinth Zone. Again. Though thankfully, it's much shorter than any of the acts in the actual Labyrinth Zone. If you're aware, you can outrun the slow-moving elevator thing and then go in the path below and skip a good portion of the stage. It pretty much shortens the stage to being only under a minute if you know where to go. Now that you've escaped that hellhole, we're now literally at the final boss. And, well, it's an alright final boss, I suppose. You pretty much just have to avoid getting crushed while getting a hit in, which usually is easiest when you go to the middle and just react to the crushes where Eggman is. The other attack is these electric balls that are slowly falling down, which you gotta stay in between two of them and then jump since they get closer together. It's just those two attacks repeated till you defeat them. Also, you have no rings in this fight, so you pretty much have to do it without getting hit at all. Once the boss is over, you get to hit him for one final blow before he's able to escape in time. And with that, we finally defeated Eggman and have finished the game. I may have sounded pretty negative at times throughout this video, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy the game, because I most definitely do. I know I said I wanted to show off why I still think Sonic 1 is a good game, and maybe my many criticisms I had with it didn't represent that well, but I never said Sonic 1 was a perfect game or even an amazing one. I just wanted to show that it can still be enjoyable, even with all of its flaws. I mean, I did go out of my way to defend Marble Zone of all stages, so I think that should attest to how much I truly like this game. The only zone I flat out dislike is Labyrinth Zone, and the rest I find to at least be decent, if not pretty dang good. Many of the stages may not take advantage of Sonic's momentum-based gameplay well, but they could still be fun and solid platforming stages in their own right. They may not have succeeded in making a fully fast-paced platformer, but it's still fun even with the slower-paced moments. Now, there were some things I didn't talk about yet, mainly because I feel like they weren't as important to me. Also, I already feel like I've been rambling on for way too long, or at least way longer than I maybe should have for a game that's at most an hour long, but I'll still bring up a few of those things since they are important enough to discuss. In terms of the game's story, I have very little to say about it. The gist of it is that Eggman has stolen a bunch of innocent animals and is using them to power up his robots. Sonic has to do everything he can to save the animals and stop Eggman's plans from what I'm assuming is world domination. Pretty simple and typical story for a 90s platformer. There are a couple of subtle details that I feel adds to the otherwise very simple story though. Since the robots are being powered up by the animals you're trying to save, defeating them will save the animals from the inside, and you can see them on screen briefly to represent that, which is a neat touch. I did briefly mention this in Marble Zone, but as a whole, I really like how the further you get into the game, the more mechanical and natural the level environments get, which is a great way to show players how much further they're progressing throughout the game. It very much reminds me of the original Crash Bandicoot, even though that game came out like 5 years later, but still. There's also these special stages you can find at the end of a level, at least if you get 50 rings or more. I didn't bring this up because, to be honest, I don't really like them that much. They have weird controls that feel impossible to precisely move around with, and losing in one of these is such a horrible feeling since you only get one try at it. The main reward for completing one is a Chaos Emerald, which unfortunately for this game, there isn't much reason to collect them all since you're only rewarded with a slightly different ending cutscene. They do at least give you a potential continue, which basically just gives you 3 lives, which is a good reward for players that need as many lives as possible, so I'd say go for them for that reason, but if you don't need lives, I just ignore them since they're not really that fun to begin with. Even with the lame reward, I wouldn't mind doing them if they were fun, but they're not unfortunately, so I rarely see myself play through them at all. With that said, I pretty much was able to say as much as I possibly could about this game, or at least the original version. Yes, I'm still not completely done talking about this 30-plus-year-old game just yet. Since Sonic 1 is one of the most iconic video games, it has been ported to pretty much everything under the sun, but not every port is the same. Some actually try to update and improve the game to feel more in line with the other classic titles. Some of these just add the spin dash, which even that alone is a huge change. But there are specific versions I'd like to discuss because in my humble opinion, these completely change Sonic 1 from being a pretty good game to a genuinely great one. If you guys are unaware, Sega actually made some ports of some of the classic Sonic games on iOS and Android. Of course, one of these being the first Sonic game. But these weren't just any old ports. They feel like flat-out remasters with how much of an improvement they were over the originals, especially in the case of Sonic 1. And if you don't believe me, well, just know that this guy right here, Christian Whitehead, was a huge contributor to making these ports a reality. Which if you don't know who Christian Whitehead is, all you really need to know is that he played a large role in creating Sonic Mania, which I think that pretty much speaks for itself. This man gets Sonic and how to replicate the controls and physics of the classic games extremely well, and it really shows with these ports. Sonic 1 really gets to shine here though. Not only do you get to have the spin dash, but you also get other improvements in the controls, like removing the max running speed cap in the original. They added a bunch of other stuff too, like multiple playable characters, time trials, and I think Supersonic is unlockable? These things help make the game so much better. Having the spin dash make the games feel more fast paced and make certain sections much easier too. Being able to fly as Tails, or glide and climb as Knuckles, especially makes certain sections much less tedious to get through. I'd say overall the game is probably more fun with these additional characters than Sonic due to their abilities. Not to mention, the game is widescreen too, which helps players see what's coming up next easier, and for a game about going fast like Sonic, that's a huge change. It is also nice to have it on phone too, since it's an easy game to pick up and play on the go, and having your phone on you all the time, it works perfectly as a nice time waster. Unfortunately though, both Sonic 1 and 2 ports have been stuck on iOS and Android, never being ported to consoles or PC. But that may confuse some of you since I have gameplay footage on screen now, so how is that the case? Well, the footage I'm showing right now on screen is actually a fan-made port, ROM hack, mod, whatever you want to call it, of the phone version that gives players a way to play it on PC. This version of the game is called Sonic Forever, and in my opinion, it's the definitive way of playing Sonic 1. It doesn't just port the phone version to PC, it also adds other features exclusive to Sonic Forever. You got this really nice menu with tons of detail and charm to it. You got so many options too, like giving Sonic the drop dash, peel out, the insta shield, the ability to finally move in the air while jumping off inclines, the elemental shields, and many more major and minor changes to suit your needs. So many of these changes completely changed the game, especially the elemental shields, giving Sonic more ways of platforming works so well in this game's type of level design, like the electric shields double jump in stages like Scrap Brain, or the bubble shield giving you oxygen in Labyrinth Zone. Now, more than ever, you feel more inclined to explore and find monitors with elemental shields since they help so much. I'd go as far as to say that the shields and new character abilities makes even Labyrinth Zone a lot more tolerable now. They also added a bunch of modes too, like a weird arcade mode, which is pretty much a game of getting the highest score possible on one life, which is a cool and different take on playing the game. There's a boss rush mode, a special stage maker, and even a golf mode? Yes, an entire mode where you're golfing an olive green hill. They even gave characters their own stats too, which is just so stupid but awesome at the same time. And lastly, they added a new playable character, Amy Rose. She is so fun to play, having the hammer jump that shoots you insanely high to the sky, or the hammer twirl that works sorta like Knuckles' glide, but moves a bit faster and falls quicker. You can even change her to lack having the spin jump, just like in the advanced games, which I wouldn't do personally, but it's cool that it's there at all. I absolutely love the way she plays, and I find her to be one of the most fun characters to speedrun stages with, which gives this game so much more replayability for me. There's more I could probably bring up, but do you see how long this video has gone? I don't think I need to add much more than I already have. Sonic Forever is so freaking good, man. I'd easily recommend checking it out if you're willing to go through the process of setting it up, which is surprisingly easy, just mainly having the phone version's ROM or packet or whatever you call it on your PC, which I'm not going to tell you how to do that, that's up to you to figure out. The link to it will be in the description as well as the pinned comment. And I know I've been ignoring a big elephant in the room, in that yes, Sonic Origins does exist. And I know they recently released a Plus expansion for it, but I've still heard it has some issues. And Amy seems to be far less fun too from what I've seen with her abilities. So for me personally, I don't have much reason to buy it, but from what I've seen, it still seems like good enough versions of these classic games. And if you want to experience all 4 of the 16-bit titles, I'd say Origins isn't a bad choice to go with. Though I don't know for sure since I still haven't played it, but it still looks fine enough. All you really need to know is that Sonic Forever is probably the best version of Sonic 1 you're going to get, so I'd highly recommend that game if possible. Holy crap, I think that's all I have to say about Sonic 1. Finally. I really didn't expect a video on this game of all things to be as long as it was. One reason I chose this as my first video is because I thought it'd be a short and easy one to make. But apparently not, so it might have been due to me explaining a lot of general aspects of Sonic and not just talking about the game. Hopefully I didn't end up repeating myself too much or rambled on for too long. Speaking of, if anyone has any constructive criticism, if anyone is even watching this video at all, you can let me know in the comments, because I'd like to potentially make more videos in the future. I'd mainly like to plan on making more videos on some of the classic Sonic games. Okay, hold on. This is me off script, interrupting this part of the outro because I was gonna originally say I wanted to make more videos, like I said, about the classic Sonic games and other games too, like before Superstars came out, but I have decided against this because this video took way longer to make than I expected. And there's other things I wanted to do, and I focused too much on this video if I'm being real. Not to say I don't want to make more videos in the future, but doing all the voiceover work and stuff, as you could probably tell, was very rough. Like, this definitely felt like a test video for me, so yeah, just wanted to say this because my opinion has changed ever since I wrote this in the script a long while back. Yeah. But I still definitely want to make more videos in the future. I just need a break and I want to do other things with my life, and I don't know if like content creation will be like a main focus for me for a while. But I did really like making this video in some ways, and You know, mainly I wanted to make the video because I like talking about games in depth, and I feel like doing it in a video format is fun, or a good way of me talking about every little detail I want to. That's the main reason why I made it, and I hope that part of the video was enjoyable. But if there's other things you enjoyed about it, like maybe the little bits of editing that I did, or anything else, I'd appreciate if you let me know, or any constructive criticism, like I said before. Once again, if anyone's watching this, but pretty much, I like to make more videos, but in the future, I also want to do other things, so it probably won't be for a while. Maybe I'll make shorter videos, maybe talking about particular things. I'm not sure yet, but yeah. That's honestly, I think that's really all I really want to say for this video. I had other things I said in the outro, but overall, I think this pretty much sums it up the best. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I guess if you want to see more, if I end up making more, whether it's these type of videos or other things I might have planned, you could like or subscribe to the channel, and also like the video if you want. Once again, I know the video wasn't good, there was a lot of problems with it. I knew the voice over and audio stuff was kind of meh, not very good at all, but like I said, I would appreciate it regardless, and yeah. That's all I have to say. I don't want to ramble on any longer. It's already been way too long. So thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate that you've been here for so long. And yeah, I guess I'll hopefully see you guys next time. Hopefully.